From Alabama football to a pit crew for Indy racing to real estate, we've got an amazing guest on the show today who's going to share his experiences with sports and business and the correlation between the two. We've got stories for days. You do not want to miss this episode of the Game Time Guru.
What time is it? Game time!
This is the Game Time Guru podcast, where I interview sports figures from all over the world to help deliver a panoramic view on sports. So whether you're a former athlete, one of the crazies, or simply a casual sports fan, this is the perfect show for you as we peel back the curtains and learn from our guests every single week. I'm your host, Shane Larson, and I'm helping you see sports through a different lens. What is up, everybody? Welcome out to another episode of the Game Time Guru podcast. I am your host, Shane Larson. Another week, another amazing interview. Excited to bring on our guest today to talk. But before we get started, I got to give you guys a little bit of insight on my sponsors. The title sponsor of the show, who helped me out so much, is 208 Printing, 208, that is, 208 Printing. Make sure to go check them out, madeby208.com. They get me my swag. They can take care of any of your branding. If you guys have a business, if you guys have a brand that you're just trying to get out there, you want to be a walking billboard, go to madeby208.com. Go check them out. They'll get your business orders taken care of. A lot of local high school teams will use them. A lot of businesses will use them. They're fantastic to work with. My guys, Tyler and Nathan over at 208 Printing. So big shout out to them. The podcast wouldn't be where it's at without them. So major appreciation. And again, I want to say thank you to all the listeners so far. I mean, we're coming up on 4 years of the show running, over 56,000 downloads, 88 different countries so far it's reached. We continue to grow worldwide, and it's all because of you guys, the listeners. So thank you so much for what you guys have done. And for everyone who's left me a review on Apple Podcasts, thank you so much. And I'd appreciate it if you haven't, please go do so. If you enjoy the show, let us know what you think. Now, the coolest part about the show is the different types of guests we get to bring on. And man, I am so excited about today's interview because I'm bringing on my good friend, Bill Barnett, who's an author, a business owner. He's into real estate, but he's also got some sports ties. And we're going to hear all about everything that he's doing. Bill, thank you for joining the Game Time Guru podcast, man.
Hey, excited to be here, Shane. And you said you're in 88 countries?
Yes, sir.
So you got to say 89 because now you're in Texas as well. So.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Represent. Okay. Yeah, that's true. So we'll call it 89, right? Hey, so Bill, I got this little book right here. You sent this to me once. You're an author. Are you dumb enough to be rich? Tell us a little bit about this and what inspired you to write this book and what it's all about.
So I've been in real estate for about 30 years, and I was, you may know the name Robert Allen. I was Robert Allen's lead speaker for about 8 years, and Bob kept encouraging me, write a book. He said, man, you got to write a book. Well, Bob wrote Nothing Down, which for the decade of the 80s was the #9 best-selling book across all genres for an entire decade, which is pretty amazing. He said, man, you got to write a book. You got to write a book. You have such a unique voice in real estate. And he actually took me to the book fair in Chicago and introduced me to his agent and a lot of publishers and helped me find an agent. And the next thing I knew, he walked me through that process. So I got two great mentors. Everybody's got to have a coach. The sports show, you've had many coaches. I've had, we still do. And as you know, you're one of my coaches in the internet digital marketing world. But you got to have coaches in your life. And Robert Allen coached me through that. And another guy, Mark Victor Hansen, who is the co-author of all the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. Mark and I go back to 1978. So those two guys really walked me through the process of how to put a book together, how to write it, how to keep your voice, and help me find the agent and the publisher. And there we went. That's the one you held up as the second edition of the book. Both the first edition and the second edition were bestsellers. And I have another book that came out a little bit before that and ready to launch a new one here in the next couple of months.
Man, okay. So here's the thing. I'm not a writer. I've tried it. I've dabbled into it as a journalism major. That was partially part of my degree. I hated writing. That's why I don't do it. I do podcasting, right? I hate it. I was never good at it. I wrote for a website for 2 years covering sports, but I never was good at writing. But I do want to write a book. For someone like myself, like, tell me about the process. You had a coach that kind of walked you
Yep.
through the process. How long did it take you from the time you started the process to the time this was actually published and in your hands to get this thing created?
From starting to being in the bookstores, that was about a 16, 17-month process.
What
Now,
did it?
a lot of that time gets eaten up. Once it gets to the publisher, there's a drag, and it's almost a year in many cases from the time that it gets there till it's actually on the bookstore shelves. And so about 7, 8 months to write the book. And my wife at the time said, I can't believe you agreed to write a book. When are you going to have time to do that? And I said, well, I don't have time to do it. So what I'm going to do is I used to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I said, I'm going to start getting up at 3:30, and I'm going to write from 3:30 to 5. And so from 3:30 till about 3:45, 3:50 was waking up, getting some coffee, getting the computer going. But I'd get about an hour a day writing in. And if you've ever built an outline for a story, you can write a book. There's a great guy. I'll send you his info because I can't recall it off the top of my head here, that not very famous, but wrote a process. And Mark Victor's the one that shared that with me. And it is about how to write a book. And it literally is taking an outline process and how you drill down in an outline. And you can keep drilling down in an outline to where you have a book where it's really easy to go back and fill in. And so if you know your topic, and you have it, you know it inside out, putting those thoughts on paper is a lot simpler if you have a process.
Totally. Oh, that's so intriguing. Yeah, we'll have to chat about this, man.
Yeah.
This is super cool. To me, it's awesome when somebody has a skill set like yourself, a knowledge that you have, and you're able to share it to the world, whether it be written, verbal, whatever, but especially written, because written, like that's a form of communication that I'm just not skilled at quite yet. So not to say that I can't be, but I would love to do that. So I commend you for it. This is a cool book, and you've got some experience, man, and it's super cool just to see who you are now. You talked about real estate and whatnot. Like, what are you doing over there? What's this 10x10 Pro? Tell us a little bit about this, and I want to give my own insight on some of the stuff I've heard you talk about too. So tell us your whole thing behind 10x10 Pro, and let us hear what that is.
I've been doing Are You Dumb Enough to Be Rich for, 18, 19 years. And I was, one of the things that's very important to me is tithing and giving back.
Uh-huh.
And you have to be involved. If you're going to be successful in life, you have to give back. And it can be, Mark Victor taught me, you could be giving back ideas to help somebody. But most of us think of it, as I do, as giving back monetarily. And you got to be doing that. And of course, the Bible teaches us you got to tithe 10%. And you do that off the top. You don't do that if you have enough room in your budget. You do that first. And so I got to thinking about that. And the real estate business is changing dramatically. And what's going to happen right now, we're about to enter into a cycle. Right now, it's as hot as it can be, has been since the end of 2012. But we're about to enter into a down cycle. It doesn't matter how the election ends up. We're going to enter into a business cycle that turns down. That's just the nature of business. And the next 8 to 10 years in real estate could be the single most important investment opportunities that you've ever had. And that's where 10x10 came about. Because one of the things I teach people is how to make $10,000 a month in passive income, where to find those particular deals to be able to accomplish two things: to be able to, one, take care of yourself and your family, but also to be giving back at the same time and giving back in cash and giving back in service, being able to help families that are less fortunate. That number of people is going to grow exponentially. And again, I don't believe from a real estate standpoint it matters who's in the election. If it's Biden, it's going to happen a little faster. If it's Trump, it's going to happen because it is the cycle, and you can't stop the cycle of the business. We are due for a cooling off of real estate prices. I believe it's going to happen in 2021, about this time, maybe a little bit early, maybe September, October of 2021. We're going to see the real estate market flatten out, and then it'll head down for a little bit. But if you know how to participate, then those things don't matter. It's just a shift in the business. That's what the book is about. I've got a new book I'm be coming out with the next couple of months, and it'll be called 10 by 10, but it's about $10,000 a month and giving back at least 10% of your earnings.
Dude, what I love about it, Bill, is your whole the whole giving back aspect of it. I find that I commend you for that. I think it's super, super awesome. It's one thing that as a man of faith, I like to give my 10%. I pay my tithing, and I respect it. I know a lot of people in the world may not fully understand that if they don't follow, the Bible and follow the same kind of like religious, sect, if you will. But I love that you don't shy away from that as a Christian man. You don't shy away from that. That is part of your business model. And I commend you for it. I think it's super, super cool. That's the one thing I wanted to say I was going to touch base on is like, it stuck out to me immediately. I had heard a podcast of yours. I was watching a Facebook Live of yours. And I'm like, dude, I just love the fact that you just, that's like one of the big factors. It's like, you're going to give back. Like, we're going to do this with the intent of giving back first. And then, and that's part of the cycle. You know what I mean? And I love it. I saw another entrepreneur who just posted about this the other day, talking about the importance of giving back. And people don't realize that the importance of giving back, even when you don't have money. Like, give back now, because money ain't going to change your habits. Yep. Like, it could, but it's not going to change you as a person, I should say. Like, or whatever he was trying to get at is like, you want to start now, because when you start earning money, you can give back better. It's not like you're going to automatically make a ton of money and start giving back. You want to kind of build those habits. Yes.
Yeah, you start that habit. And you mentioned Facebook Live, so I'm gonna plug the Thursday morning Facebook Live. If you get a chance, jump over to Bill Barnett on Facebook. Every Thursday morning we do a men's prayer breakfast. Now, ladies, you're invited as well. But it is the Seven Churches Men's Prayer Breakfast. We do that on Central Time. Of course, that's God's time here in Texas. So we start that at 6:20 on Thursday mornings and run to about 7 o'clock. We'd love to have you join us. It is a praise and worship, and just talking about what's going on in the world, how we interact with the rest of the world, and our responsibility of Christians on living in a day-to-day basis, and the challenges that we face. So I would love to have any of you join us with that.
I'll make sure to tag that here in the description as well when we post this, and make sure that they can see that, because you guys want to join that. It's awesome. I think that's so cool of you guys, Bill. Absolutely fantastic. Now you did a time drop here earlier. You mentioned you were an author. You've been doing, and then sorry, you said you've been doing Are You Dumb Enough to Be Rich for over 18, 19 years. So before you wrote the book and all this stuff. I mean, okay. Before that, what got you into this type of work in the real estate game, and like, what was the driving factor behind even getting to this side of work?
Blind luck.
Okay.
So my professional training, I started out at Merrill Lynch in the 80s, and my professional training is in the financial services industry, investment banking / merchant banking. And after did that for about 10 years. And the last 5 years of that, a couple of guys that I had worked with at Merrill Lynch, I had ended up living in California. I was living in LA, and a couple of guys that I worked with here in Texas flew out one day and said, "Hey, we want to meet with you." And they said, "We're going to start this investment banking firm, and we want you to be a partner." And I said, "Nah, I'm life's good. I've been out here for about 7 years, love it, and I'm not interested. But thank you so much." Well, very shortly thereafter was the Whittier earthquake. And my oldest son, who's now 28, was about 5 weeks old, and it happened roughly around 5 o'clock in the morning. And you got little kids, so when, especially the littler they are, man, you go in and just check, make sure they're breathing. That's all you want to do. Just yep, they're breathing, good. And I had walked in and picked him up out of his crib at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and about the time I got a hold of him, good, this earthquake hits. And it was 7.1 or 7.4. It was a roller, which is not the type that call heavy damage, but it got my attention. And I was like, I'm going back to Texas. And I called those guys and said, "Hey, is that offer still open?" They said, "Yep, move back." So we had a partnership for about 5 years, and I had done something. We had a senior partner who had put up the bulk of the money to start the firm, and then I had offended him somehow. Did not know that. It took years for me to find that out. And so every Friday we would have a meeting before we all went to lunch. We'd go in the conference room and just kind of go over the week, how things were, what was on the agenda for the next week. So we go in and by that time we had grown to 4 partners. And a lot like sitting at the dinner table, we always sat the same spot. And there was a folder in front of everybody's place. I sat down, opened the folder, and there was this check with my name on it, and it was a pretty good sized check. And I went, "Wow, did we do a deal that I'm unfamiliar with? I didn't know about?" And they're like, "Yes, we're buying you out. You've got till 5 o'clock to get your stuff out of your office. Goodbye."
Ooh.
And I'm like, oh. And so, like I said, it took years to figure out I had personally offended the senior partner. And so they decided we had a buyout clause, which if you ever do business and you have more than one person, I can't suggest anything stronger than you have buyout addressed from day one so that if something happens to either one of you or more, then you have the ability to do that. We did it because we were macho crazy, and we had decided that we didn't want to be partners with anybody's ex-wife or with anybody's widow. So we built this buyout thing. Well, they had exercised the buyout, so I'm totally devastated. I go home. Of course, it's on a Friday, so I get packed up, go home. It was pretty funny. I look like the Beverly Hillbillies in reverse. I had this really nice big old Mercedes sedan that was going like this with all my junk in it back to the house. And I decided I took a little time off. It was to ostensibly work on my golf game. And by the way, that didn't help any. And so I ended up, I said, I'll just find something to do. I'm going to buy a house just until I decide where I want to land professionally. And that was the start of real estate in my life. And that's been about 30 years now.
Wow, man. Like if I didn't ask that question, I don't know if I'd ever know that unless you share that in your trainings and stuff. And I come across it one day, but I hadn't until this point actually heard the full gist of it.
Yep. It's that thing of so many times in life, something happens to us that is devastating to us at the time.
Right.
And then given the perspective of time as we go forward, we look back and go, wow, one of the best things that's ever happened to me was those guys, in my opinion, being knuckleheads. If they hadn't done that, I wouldn't have had the last 30 years that have just been amazing.
You know, I commend you for that too, Bill, because listen, I did a Facebook Live this morning, just kind of sharing some thoughts. And I said the same thing. I went through a divorce when I was in my, mid-20s, and it was in 2013. And at the time my life was upside down and I didn't know what was going to happen and yada, yada. And everyone kept saying, "Oh, keep your head up. You got your whole life ahead of you." And I couldn't see it at the time. I was depressed and this and that. And then I look back, I'm like, it's only been 7 years. I can't even imagine, I'm so grateful that happened. And I'm so grateful because I've met my wife now. I've got 2 amazing little boys, and life has gotten, it's grown, and it's the same concept. Like, you never know, some of those things they're necessary. And I actually feel that there's a superior being above that actually plays chess, not checkers. And he's putting things in place for you. So quote unquote knuckleheads over there doing their thing. That was the Lord playing chess, in my opinion.
Yep. Amen.
So here's the deal. People are probably listening to this. Are like, okay, this is awesome. How does this have to tie into sports, right? So here's, like I told you guys in the beginning, I told the listeners, listen, Bill's got, this is the coolest thing. It's like he's a well-established business owner right now. He knows his stuff. He's got a sports background too. He's a very, very I'm trying to think of he's a coach. He's a former athlete. I mean, pit crew member. So we're going to talk about it from the beginning. We're talking, you mentioned to me, you played at Alabama under Bear Bryant.
Absolutely. 1974. Played is a little bit aggressive. If they recognize in the All-American world, if they recognize tackling dummies, I would have been an All-American tackling dummy. But 74, I was a running back on the. If you can, you're way too young to know this personally, but there was a time in college football that freshmen were not allowed to play. And 1974 was toward the end of that. But 1974 was my freshman year at Alabama, and I played freshman ball. Now, we practiced together, but we had separate games, and freshmen were not allowed to play. And that was my fate at the time. And at the end of that year, I ended up, like many guys in football, that lose a knee. And back then, arthroscopic was somebody's dream because it didn't and pretty much wrap that up. But I was very blessed to be able to stay involved with the athletic department, and Coach Bryant had such an incredible influence on my life. And then in later years, I got involved with the athletic department again when Coach Gene Stallings was there. And had some great times from 90 till about 97 with Coach Stallings. Maybe 95, I think, might have been his last year. But some great times there, and just incredibly blessed.
Man, so what position did you say you played? Was it a running back?
I was a halfback. Yeah, I was a halfback in the bone. I was a right halfback.
So you had to have been – okay, listen, like you can say what you want, oh, you're a tackling dummy and whatnot, but the fact of the matter is not many athletes make it to the next level, especially at a Division I level. And granted, I know it was a different era of football, but that still means you were a good athlete. So going through high school, where did you play high school ball at? And were you pretty well known around the valley of where you were at?
I was in the county, but I played in around the Birmingham area.
Okay.
And when I was in high school, I was a little bitty guy, relatively speaking. I was in the 6th grade. I was 5'10", 155 pounds, and I thought I was going to be mammoth.
Yeah.
Well, I graduated high school at the same size.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So I wasn't getting a lot of love from colleges because of my size. I was okay speed-wise. I was considered quick, not necessarily fast. I ran a 4.63. Now that's about a 260 linebacker speed. But I moved down to, my dream had always been to go to Alabama. I thank Lord I had that opportunity to do that and to play ball. So 2 weeks after graduating from high school, I moved on campus, and I found I just went over to the athletic department, found the receptionist and said, I'm here to play ball. And she got me hooked up with Coach Gary White, who was the academic coordinator. And he was the guy that went through the NCAA clearinghouse, ushered you through that. And just welcomed me with open arms, a little old skinny kid. And from then, which was in late May, until August the 17th, when we reported for fall camp, I went from 155 to 212 pounds, no juice.
I was going to say.
It just completely fell on me. I went from a 38 jacket to a 44. My pants stayed in the waist. I was still wearing a 34, but I couldn't get into 34s. I couldn't get them over my thighs. But my body changed. And so when I showed up at fall camp, there were guys that there were some of the coaches that I hadn't met yet, but because I had worked out through the summer, most of them I had, and they just treated me completely different than when I first got there. They were just like, we probably had 30 walk-ons, and in the first 2 weeks we were down to about 10 or 12 of us that survived. Yeah, and it was kind of set up that way to make sure that right off the bat, Coach Bryant always practiced hard, and he had mellowed by the time I got there. He was later in his career, but believe me, the assistant coaches were not mellow, and so we trained pretty hard. And part of that was his belief was, I want to make sure that you don't ever quit on me during a game. And how am I going to do that? I'm going to push you during practice to find out if I can break you or not. And one of the conversations that you and I had recently was the Junction Boys.
Right.
And that epitomizes his thought process. Now, he wasn't doing anything like that by the time he got to Alabama, anything close to that. But it lets you know his mentality and what he thought about. And those guys, they only won one game the first year that he was at A&M. But those guys went on to win the Southwestern Conference, I think, their senior year, and just an amazing story. But, yeah, it was a fabulous time. And, I was a very different guy by the time we started fall practice.
So crazy. Like, it's super cool, though, to hear your perseverance, too, and just your determination. Like, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to say, hey, I want to play, get an opportunity. You pack on some muscle. There's a couple talking points here. One, I tell people this all the time, Bill, there's a lot of athletes like myself, for example. I was pretty small in high school. I boxed for Golden Gloves. I played basketball. But but like I didn't really hit my maturity in my body actually till I was probably about 20, 21 years old, to be quite honest. But I graduated when I was 17. I was a younger kid compared to a lot of guys these days. I was a really young 17 as a senior. And so like I felt like sports kind of sucked for me in high school because I didn't develop into my body. Now I'm a lot more athletic than I ever was back then. But sometimes these kids just don't have the patience to let their bodies develop. One, it obviously sounds like yours developed pretty quick. It's you're hitting the weights, eating, doing your thing. All of a sudden your body starts to mature.
All through high school.
That's so crazy.
Did everything in the world I could think of to gain weight, and it just nothing happened. And then your body just changes, your metabolism changes, and it literally felt like it fell on me. Yeah, when my parents saw me, they were in shock. They were just like, "What is going on,
dude?"
Working out and eating.
That's what you got to do. I think that's super cool. So just for any athletes out there who think they can't gain size or whatever it may be, just be patient. Everybody's body develops at a different level at a different time.
Yep.
And that's just the reality of it. The second thing I wanted to touch base on is the practices. So when you're talking about like, hey, it's almost like the weeding out the weak kind of scenario. It reminds me of my very first year boxing at Golden Gloves. It was a similar mentality with the boxing coaches. Now, here's what, I don't know if your coaches were like this, but it kind of sounds like they had that mentality. Football coaches are they're famous for this kind of stuff. But we'd go into the boxing ring, Bill, and my coaches, they'd tell our parents as soon as we'd get in, like my mom came to the first practice with me to get the form signed because I was only 15 at the time. Yeah, we won't let him in the ring for 30 days. He's got to do all this and that. And then we'll put him in there and let him like spar a little bit and yada, yada, yada. Okay. We get that done. So she signs the form. I do my first day of practice where I'm in there for an hour and a half hitting the bags and doing some shadow boxing. And they're teaching me technique. They found that I already had a little bit of experience with that. Okay. Mom's not there the second day. That's the very next day. So on a Tuesday, she comes in. Wednesday, I go in there. Hey, Shane, suit up. What? So I put my headgear on. I put my belt on. I'm in there taking shots in my second day of boxing ever. So they kind of did that. And then I witnessed it multiple times. And I got popped a lot that night. I went home with a bloody nose, like I was speed up. But I saw multiple newbies come in. Everybody wants to box. They wanted to look cool. So they'd come in and they're athletes. So they think they can come and box. And they'd throw them in the ring second day in there. I noticed that was a common theme over the 3.5 years that I fought. And a lot of them never showed up again. And I saw so many kids come in and it's like, oh, one kid gets knocked down by a jab. The kid got popped with a really good jab and got knocked to the floor. And I think he realized at that point, like, this is the weakest punch that I could accept, like I could receive. And I got knocked down from it. Yeah, sport's not for me. He didn't show up ever again. And so like, it's that same mentality to see that you were able to get through that and kind of go through these practices and all these other freshmen are kind of falling off. Shows the perseverance. And I think that's a skill set that sports, it teaches you some stuff in life. Absolutely. I mean, and I'm looking at the congruencies between, like you just shared your story earlier about the guys, the business partners, and you're going through a tough situation. I mean, you got to persevere and try to find a way through it. And obviously you have done that and had a successful career outside of those business partners. Now tell me this. So we mentioned the Junction Boys. If anybody has not seen that, it is I loved it. I mean,
and obviously,
go ahead.
Obviously, I didn't have anything to do with the Junction Boys. I'm not quite that mature. However, you can't love Coach Bryant. You can't love Alabama football without being connected to Texas A&M and learning about the Junction Boys. And as I mentioned, I got to know Coach Gene Stallings in the 90s. He's still a friend today, but got to spend a lot of time with Coach Stallings. And he was an actual Junction Boy. He was one of those guys.
Now, the stories that Gene has compared to like your days playing for Bear Bryant, how do they match up? Like, are they, because you mentioned he was a lot more mellow when he got to you, like when you got there, I should say.
He was not mellow with
Does he have any, like, what's one crazy thing that Gene said about the Junction Boys? Because I want to compare that to something maybe you experienced, like with Bryant.
So he would be literally down on the field. He would do that with us. Most of the time he was up. He had a tower on the practice field, and most of the time he was on the tower. When he came off the tower, it was either time to wrap up, or if he came to talk to you, it was not going to be a good day. But at A&M, he didn't have that, and he would literally get in. And I heard a lot of these stories in the 60s at Alabama as well, where he would be on the field and like he'd take on a defensive lineman or he'd hit an offensive lineman, no pads, obviously. And he was not a small man. And so he would do a lot of that. My favorite story from Coach Stallings about his time with Coach Bryant at A&M, because we and I were yakking one day, and I just said, what's the if you got one story only, what would it be? He said, well, we finished Junction. We get back, and our first game was against Texas Tech. It was at Kyle Field on a Saturday night. And we got beat bad. It was like 41-0 or something. They just got destroyed. And they had a very small number of players left after Junction. And he said, so, we were licking our wounds. I go to bed, and on Sunday morning at 6 o'clock, one of the assistants comes in and wakes me up and says, hey, Coach Bryant wants to see everybody down in the locker room. He said, so I'm the first one in the locker room. And he said, the first thing I noticed was it stunk really bad because our uniforms had not been washed. Our game uniforms were hanging in our lockers, still filthy, sweaty, guys, stinky. And he said, and there was an equipment manager in there that said, get dressed, put your game uniform back on. We're going to have practice. Coach Bryant wants to see you on the field. And he said he was the very first one to go out to the field. He said he gets out, and Coach Bryant is draped back on this chain link fence. He smoked unfiltered Chesterfields like there was no tomorrow. And he said well, they're puffing away. And he said he could hear something. And he said, I thought he was talking. He said, then I realized he was singing. And he said the closer I got to him, I understood what he was singing, and he said he was singing, what a friend we have in Jesus. And he said, man, I knew it was going to be a long day, and it was.
Oh, man. Oh, dude, that's like something you'd see from a movie, for real. Like, that's hilarious. That's the thing is you hear stories about it. People like myself, I love studying the history of the game, and so, like, I'll be honest, I don't know if I could have ever played for the man. Like, that I just didn't have the discipline back then to be able to handle that kind of thing. Like, I'd be scared out of my mind every single day. Like, that's crazy. Oh man, that's like, if I heard him singing that and I actually could, comprehend the words, I'd be like, okay, helmet off. I'm walking out, dude. None of this. Not today.
My personal couple of stories. One, once I got cleared, which was a feat in itself, I ended up with 1/10 of a point above the minimum grade clearance by the NCAA clearinghouse. I got called into the office, and he just came in. I walked out. I was scared to death. And he kind of unfolded out of his chair. If you ever get a chance to go to University of Alabama for anything, right by the stadium is the Coach Paul Bear Bryant Museum. And in the museum, they actually have recreated his office, which is just so cool. But he got up and just said, hey, I want to welcome you to the University of Alabama football team. And I left there just sky high. So we get into November. We're prepping for Auburn, and practice is over, and I get an equipment manager comes up and says, Coach Bryant wants to see you in his office. And of course, I'm like, oh my Lord, what have I done? I'm going through everything in my head. I'm like, my grades are okay. So I get into the office, and he said, I just got off the phone with your mama. And I'm like, uh-oh. And he said, your dad's in the hospital. And my dad had colon cancer in the 70s. Well, at that time, that was a death knell.
Right.
And my dad survived. But at the time, that was about as devastating a news as you could get as a man. And he said, your dad's in the hospital. He's got cancer. They're doing surgery in the morning, which was another one of those things of how fast they schedule the surgery. He said, you needed to go home and take care of your mama. And I said, well, Coach, we got practice tomorrow. And he said, you go home, take care of your mama. There's always a place for you on the University of Alabama football team. You go do that. You come back when you're done. And just, that's the reason why guys years and years, decades later, love the man, still love him today. he taught me so much. But that compassion that he showed, and then very quickly after that, my career was over. But once my career was over, my relationship wasn't over. And that really spoke volumes to me about who he was as a man. And he had flaws, you bet, but he was an incredible man and an amazing father figure to all of us that had some time to spend with him.
I'm so glad you shared that story, Bill, because quite honestly, if you're just the general public, this is what, I mean, unfortunately, this is how society is. We don't get to hear a lot of stories, right? But so if you had only seen the Junction Boys or only like seen that and study that and you're my age, right? You'd think the guy is a complete jerk, right? Like just an absolute like, and you hear stories from time to time, but you don't get to hear the details from somebody who's been in the thick of things. That's awesome because it gives you a different perspective. And I think that's more fair to the man himself. Like that's more fair for him. You get to hear that. He's obviously successful at what he did. Like he's been known to be able to coach, but you don't get to hear the cool stories. And I appreciate you sharing that because yeah, we need more of that. We got to hear more of that. At Alabama, you're talking about this. Do you still go to games there from time to time?
I haven't been back to the university since Coach Stallings left. I've done a bunch of games out here, 4 or 5 games at Cowboy Stadium, where I've had a chance to be on the sidelines for a little bit. And usually by the time the game starts, you're asked to leave most of the time. But Mal Moore, who died not too long ago, Mal was on the offensive staff when I played, went on to be the athletic director at Alabama. So, and he was there when Coach Stallings was there. So I got a chance to reconnect with Coach Moore and spend some time with him before games and spend some time. I always bump into Coach Stallings at those games. So we played Michigan, we played Michigan State, we played Wisconsin, played Southern Cal, all out here at Cowboy Stadium. And so I got to do those. Hadn't been back to Tuscaloosa in quite a while. Both my parents are gone, so I don't have anybody. I have an aunt and uncle probably 2 hours away from Tuscaloosa, so I don't have a lot of reason to get back. But
I feel you. The first thing, hey, it's one of those things for me as a sports fan. As I'm getting older, that's a bucket list for me, right?
Oh yeah.
So like one of my bucket lists as a Buckeyes fan was going to Columbus. I wanted to go there. I also wanted to check out Nebraska, so I went there last year just to check out what Lincoln was like. Because there's a lot of history there. Alabama, I want to go there. So hey,
it's amazing.
One of these days, if I go, maybe that'll give you a reason to go back. I don't know. I'd love to check it out and just see the stadium and the culture. I love the culture of college football. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about too. First off, you mentioned all those games at Cowboy Stadium. If anyone hasn't been to Cowboy Stadium, Jerry's World, absolutely phenomenal stadium. You don't have to like the Cowboys. It's a phenomenal stadium, amazing venue. We got to take the tour of it. I'm a Cowboys fan, so it was obviously it was cool for me that way.
Well,
but
so we share that misery. I mean,
so happy Thanksgiving yesterday, eh? Fake punt, huh? Great times, man. Oh my goodness. I always say this. I live to lose. I haven't seen a Super Bowl since I was in the 2nd grade. So it's been fantastic. But yeah, I love the Cowboys, but those games that you just mentioned, they were all shellackings, dude. Alabama just like dominating every one of those. Was the USC game the one that you were talking about where USC was trying to like crawl out of the tunnel and be all like pumped up? Do you remember what I'm talking about? It was just a few years back and USC was like trying to like act like they were crawling out of the tunnel and then they got like walloped like 50 something to 3.
Guy, Juju Smith-Schuster is the only guy from that team I remember. But yeah, and we had a freshman quarterback. We had a guy who's no relation to me, a guy named Blake Barnett, guy who comes out and fumbles the ball in his very first play and looks completely lost. And they put in a guy named Jalen Hurts, who is now backup quarterback at the Eagles. And Jalen went in and he fumbles on his very first play, and we're just like, oh my gosh, this is not good. And then And then he kind of got his feet under him, and they rolled pretty stout that day.
I'm pretty positive they walloped them by like 45 or 50 points. It was a bad game for USC. The Pac-12 in general, like that was bad news bears for them. That whole conference, they couldn't match athletically. That was bad. Didn't Alabama win the national championship that year? Am I mistaken there?
I think so. I don't remember which year that was. I want to make sure we had a chance to bring this up. So Ohio State wins the national championship in 2014.
Go Bucks.
And beat us in the Sugar Bowl, the 2015 Sugar Bowl, 42-35. But when I was thinking about being on today and you being an Ohio State fan, it hit me when I was watching the Cowboy debacle yesterday. I was like, Ezekiel Elliott was in that game. Oh, yeah, and Derrick Henry was in that game. Oh, yeah, and Amari Cooper was in that game. And Von Bell was, and I just started thinking about all the guys that were in that game that are in the NFL right now, and it was amazing. I obviously will know more Alabama guys than Ohio State guys, but Joey Bosa was in that game. O.J. Howard was in there. T.J. Yeldon was in there. It just I had jotted down a couple because I was shocked at how many Kenyon Drake, Cam Sims, Jonathan Allen, who was playing yesterday, Deshaun Hand, Eddie Jackson with the Bears, Landon Collins, and then you guys, and I'm sure I'm way short over there, but Cardell Jones, J.T. Barrett, Michael Bennett, Braxton Miller. I already mentioned Von Bell and Joey Bosa, and, of course, Zeke. But I was just like, how crazy is that, the number of guys that are currently in the NFL that were in that game?
That is crazy. And it's cool that you brought that up because I wasn't thinking that, but now that you bring it up, I'm like, wow. And that, my friends, is exactly why there's a difference. I live in Boise. I'm a Boise State alum. So everybody's like, Boise State football. I'm like, there's a reason these elite teams are elite. They've got athletes that you will not see at other that's just the reality of it. And I always say this, Bill, the way that football works now, we'll talk about that too, is I always break it down. You've got good teams, you've got great teams, and you've got elite teams. And there are only a handful, maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 elite teams each year. But each year it seems like there's like 2. Because in the 3 and 4 elite teams, like last year was probably the most it's been. Like we had 3 elite teams. The 4th one was Oklahoma. They really couldn't compete with the top teams. So you had LSU, Clemson, and Ohio State. And it's like, and then you got great teams. They're fantastic teams across, like, the top 10, typically up until the top 15, 20 sometimes, but then it's a drop off. But the reason they're elite is because of the recruiting and the types of athletes and the strength and conditioning, and just these are NFL athletes. And for those who don't understand the difference between an NFL athlete and a collegiate athlete, there is a big difference. When I went and saw Clemson play Ohio State for the first time in 2016, I went to that game, and then this last year's game, which sucked for both reasons because I lost both of them. But when we were at the Fiesta Bowl in 2016, Deshaun Watson was playing, Bill. I was sitting there like, I've never seen, in all the games I've been at, he was the best player I've ever seen play live. Like say what you will about him now in the NFL, but at the time he was fantastic, the best live football player I've ever seen. But I'm looking at like some of these, I think it was Christian Wilkins. He's a defensive lineman for Clemson. He's running from sideline to sideline faster than running backs at Boise State. Like I'm telling you, I'm like, that's a different athlete. That's an NFL athlete. There's a difference. And that's why I think it's crazy. You just mentioned that there's NFL athletes across the board. Do you see, like, when you look at the state of college football right now, compared to what it was back then, what are some of the differences that you see right now? And are they good differences, or are you kind of concerned about them?
Overall, I'd say they're great differences, and the one that just jumps off the page is the athlete themselves. So on my team, there were a couple of Hanna boys, Charlie Hanna and David Hanna. They were little brothers of John Hanna, who in the last century was voted on the All-Century team as possibly the best guard to ever play in the NFL. And those guys were like 250, 260, but they were defensive linemen. And you looked at them and just thought, oh my gosh, these are mountains, and they would be just obliterated today with the size and speed today of athletes is just absolutely shocking. I try to keep up with recruiting a little bit, and it's the thing that I marvel at every single year. You got kids now that are routinely 300 pounds. They're 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", and you're seeing those guys that are running 5 flat in a 40, and you're seeing linebackers at 245 to 265 that are running 4.6, 4.5, just as a matter of course. And it's just amazing, the quality of the athlete. I get concerned about the use of the transfer portal, and what the impact that can have on our sport. That bothers me. This whole the targeting thing, I understand it. I agree, but we've got to figure out a better way to get it implemented. And it's the reason why I believe teams like Alabama have gone to offense, because you've taken all the bite out of the defense. And those guys they don't play scared, but they're concerned about, am I going to get kicked out of the game and the first half of the next game, because I'm leading with my helmet. And it's hard when now, after several years, this will kind of get washed out. But at the time, you think about guys right now, when they were in high school and when they were in middle school playing, they were taught, you put your nose between the numbers, you're leading with your head. And so in their formative years, they were really taught that, until that changes. And it's changing on the lower level. But until those guys, till there's nobody else around that was taught that way, defenses are going to be handicapped. And so that's we're gonna see offensive football. It's a cycle. We're gonna see offensive football for the next 5, 6, 10 years, and then defenses will figure out something to get caught up to that side of the game. But that concerns me a little bit.
I totally see that. I too agree that there should be some levels when it comes to targeting. There's got to be levels. Like, I mean, that's you've got these players who can't play on instinct anymore. They've got to think, and then in a game like this with the speed and the athletes, and it's a game of inches, it's a game of like fractions of a second. You can't play on instinct anymore. You have to think, and then all of a sudden it's a completed pass, or you're suspended for the next game. Like, there's a little, it's super, super tough. And I mean, not to bring up a bad thing for my Buckeyes fans, but last year there was a call in the Fiesta Bowl. It was a targeting call that took out our starting safety and starting corner / safety. And for targeting against Trevor Lawrence, when the quarterback ducked down to take a sack, and he happened to meet him level to level, but the quarterback was the one who initiated it because he ducked down and dropped levels, and then he gets suspended for the rest of the game. Like, he's out. He was out for the rest of the game. That was a turning point in the game. It was a third down sack. It should have been a change of possession. Clemson goes on and scores right after that. Momentum completely shifts for the rest of the game. It's one of those things, and that's not the only reason they lost. I'm not saying that, but it was one of those things that was super, super unfortunate. Like, penalty, okay, that's going to be debatable. Kick them out, it's tough. Like, I understand the safety of the players, but I really like the insight there that you mentioned of how it's going to turn to offense. That is probably exactly what we're seeing. A lot of teams, even Alabama, which we're seeing right now, they're throwing up crazy amounts of points. I mean, Alabama's like crazy famous for having good running backs and receivers, like elite. I'm talking NFL running backs, NFL receivers, and a quarterback that is competent enough to get them the ball. And they're still doing that, but they were kind of always like the boring team for a while, even under Saban when he was there. Like, they were just boring. And then it seemed like it kind of shifted over the last 5 years or so. I thought it was when Lane Kiffin came in for a minute.
Absolutely.
They got a little more exciting.
Tip your hat to Saban to go, hey, and Coach Bryant did this. Coach Bryant in 1970 shifted to the wishbone. And our offense had become anemic the two previous season, and there were a lot of people saying that the game had passed him by. He was too old, time to retire, boom, boom, boom. And he shifts to the wishbone and had the single most successful decade, the decade of the 70s that a school's ever had. Not our school, that a school has ever had. The first school in football history to win 100 games in a 10-year period, back when we were playing 11 games and 12 games, not when we were playing 14, 15, 16 games. So I got to take my hat off to Coach Saban for going, hey, you know what? He's the one that made that decision. We're going to go to you can play hurry up without having to be in a hurry. and that is as long as you get up to the line quick, you're killing the defense. They can't substitute.
Right.
You've got an opportunity to get a player mismatch. And then once you're at the line, you can take as much time as you want to take. You can use up all of that pre-clock and boom, off you go. But I tip my hat to him, both making that decision and then going out and finding one of the most outrageous offensive minds out there in Lane Kiffin, who I still I love Lane. And I saw it again this year. Not only did we have our hands full with them, but recently I saw it. I try to remember who they played the last couple of weeks, but they scored from about 95 yards. And he throws his clipboard up, in the air. He's doing the touchdown. He's running down the field, and you got to love that kind of enthusiasm.
Oh, I love Kiffin. I know him and Saban have complete polar opposites, like personalities, and so obviously that may not mesh well there, and it didn't at the end of their reign. But I love Kiffin's style, dude. He's just an odd breed. I do really like. I respect Saban for that, and I love the point that you brought up with the hurry up offenses. I've always been a couple years back, Oregon used to be like under Chip Kelly, this hurry up, you got to snap the ball in like 8 to 10 seconds, and it worked for a certain period of time. However, when that happened, if you got a 3 and out, then your defense is back on the field within 60 seconds. And so and it didn't happen often with Oregon, but against certain teams it did. I mean, there were certain teams that struggled, that caused Oregon to struggle. And that's when you'd see them have a hiccup, is when their defense got worn out because they weren't used to be on the field that long. I love the whole idea of hurry up offense that's not in a hurry. Like, get them up to the line, because then the defense has to stay there. And if they do decide to sub somebody out, you can just snap the ball, like get set, snap it, and get a penalty. Like, you can figure it out that way. And then the defense has to start thinking, get up there and take your time. It's one thing that I think more coaches are catching on to now, but Saban caught on to it and realized, like, that's how you do it. You get a first down real quick. Okay, get up there and get your next play set real quick. And everyone's like, oh shoot, okay, we got to regroup. Yep. And they start hitting them. I like Saban. I used to despise him. Bill, I have to be honest. I used to hate Alabama with a passion. It was not until, I'm not even joking, February, I read a book. It's called It Takes What It Takes. The author is Trevor Mowat. His father actually helped with Chicken Soup for the Soul and some other books and such. Trevor Mowat is Russell Wilson's mental consultant. So he helps with the consulting for him and his mindset. Well, he also worked for Saban in Alabama, and he worked for Kirby Smart in Georgia. I love Trevor. So I had him on my show and was discussing stuff with him. And the stuff he talked about, not only on my show, but in his book, about working with Saban and Saban's intelligence and his love for his players, but his discipline and the way that he coached, I completely shifted, Bill. I'm like, I look at Alabama in a completely different light now. I'm like, no wonder. It's one thing to get to the top. It's a whole nother thing to stay at the top. It is so hard in life, business, whatever, get to the top, but to consistently stay there, which is why I think LeBron James is a phenomenal athlete, because you got to always stay motivated. And Saban's got this down, and he's a phenomenal coach. The program is showing it.
LSU had that absolutely unbelievably amazing year last year. And hey, they beat us, and it was fun to watch them throughout the course of the year. And as an SEC guy, I watch a lot of SEC football, not just us, but I have dear friends that are a lot of them that are LSU fans. And I said, hey, my hat's off. Incredible, amazing year. You got to understand, next year is going to be tough on you. Oh, we're going to be great next year. I'm like, listen to Saban. He says it's one thing to get to the top. It's a whole different thing to be able to stay there. And now schools like LSU and Coach O are experiencing what Saban's been able to conquer year in, year out, and even lose. This is the single most cohesive staff this year that we've had at his tenure. This is the first time we've had all the coordinators, all the major coaches return, and it's pretty amazing. And I really like Sarkisian, our offensive coordinator. He did Washington for a while, USC for a while, and just has rehabilitated his career. Highest paid assistant in the country. He's like 2.5 or 2.7 a year as an OC, but a guy that just I really like the way he does things. He's going to be coaching. Saban's got COVID.
Yeah.
And so Sark's going to be taking over tomorrow in the Iron Bowl, which is going to be weird that Saban won't be there. But And that's always our big game. Our big games in the last few years, LSU's become a big rival, but it's historically it's been Auburn is our primary rival, and then Tennessee is if Auburn's won, Tennessee's 1A, and then LSU's worked their way up into that conversation the last few years. So it's been fun, and then. Georgia, and now there's so many head coaches at other schools that have coached under Saban. So many in the SEC that it makes the game a little bit more interesting. And he taught them maybe everything that they know, but not everything that he knows.
Yeah, he's smart like that. If you ever look at the Saban coaching tree, like he doesn't lose to his former coaches, like his assistants. He teaches them enough to get them to move on, but he it almost seems like he will never divulge everything. He's awesome, dude. I just love it.
That way, Coach Bryant lost very few games to his former assistants, and one of the great ones was the '68 Cotton Bowl, where he lost to Gene Stallings. And there's this famous picture of Coach Bryant hosting Gene Stallings up after the game. It meant a lot to him that one of his own had been able to do that. So, and a highlight of Coach Stallings' career.
That is awesome. That's awesome for Coach Stallings too. It reminds me, I interviewed Jerry Stackhouse, 18-year NBA legend. And one of the things he said to me, I asked him a question, Bill. I said, hey, like when young guys came into the league, you knew they were competing for your position. They got drafted to the team that you're on, and you kind of know the organization's trying to fill your spot as you get older and older. Did you have a problem, like, giving them advice? And he told me, he goes, no, I didn't, because they can't do it better than me anyway. So I'm going to tell you everything, but you still can't beat me. And so it's kind of like that's what it was reminding me of when you were just saying that. We're talking about Saban, like, yeah, he'll give you the secrets, but he has this like swag to him that he won't ever admit. But like Saban's got a swag to him that's like, can't beat me anyways. So I can tell you all I want, but you ain't gonna beat me.
There's a great business lesson there. I would not teach real estate in the Dallas-Fort Worth market when I first got started speaking and touring, because I didn't want to empower my own competition. And a little bit of an ego blow, but also just a dose of reality to realize 99% of the people aren't going to do anything anyway. They'll buy the book, they'll read, they'll send you questions, whatever, but they won't go out and put it into play. And it's one of the things I love Tony Robbins, and I'm about to do a Date with Destiny with him in 10 days or so.
Oh, sweet.
Which is an amazing 5-day event. But having that deal of, put it into action. That's one thing I love about my kids is one of the things that I can brag on them about is I've got them to try things and just get over this. And I'll use my 15 now as a great example of this. Loved baseball and was terrible. He was a great fielder. He couldn't hit a basketball. And there were 2 separate seasons that he just, Dad, I want to quit. And I'm like, no, you can't quit. You can decide not to play next year, but you can't quit in the middle of a season. You don't do that to your coach. You don't do that to your team. You can't do that. And well, why? Because it's just embarrassing. And I said, well, you realize that you're not doing anything to improve that. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, all you got to do is ask, and I'll spend separate time with you just on hitting. And then when we get to a point where you're outside of my realm of expertise, we'll bring in some other people. And he's had some time to work with a couple of guys that several that have played minor league ball, and one that played for the Rangers for years through there. And he started putting in the time, because I got them to understand that if you want to do it and you want to be successful at it, 9 to 5 for you and I as a business analogy, 9 to 5 ain't going to cut it. Everybody's at 9 to 5. What's going to happen prior to 9 o'clock and what happens after 5 o'clock, that's what determines your level of success in whatever it is that you're doing. And so he started getting coaching lessons, and we do a couple of lessons a week just on hitting. And he went an entire season without a hit.
Oh, wow.
That's brutal. It was brutal for me. I
Yeah, I
can't
can imagine.
imagine how brutal it was for him. So last year they didn't get to play during the summer because of COVID, but they in the spring guy hit 6 home runs. But it just the kid just and I told him the thing I love about you is that you listen, you're coachable, and that all my boys are coachable, and that's the thing that I want to stress to people so much is that whether it's you or your kids in sports, whether it's you in business, you got to be coachable. If you're coachable, then you have a chance at whatever it is that you want to do. If you're not coachable, then just hang it up and go find something else to do. Probably the greatest compliment, and it's one of those things you don't realize it until years later, was that when Stallings got back to Alabama, and I got a chance to spend a lot of time with Coach Moore, and I was back at a game, and he said, "Hey, come on, we're gonna go in the athletic facility and grab some lunch." And I was like, "Oh, this is this is so cool," because all of the buildings that were there when I was there, they're all gone.
Oh, yeah.
It's all different. The stadium is way different. Yeah, so I was like, "Oh, this is so cool seeing a lot of this new stuff for the first time." And so we're down yakking, and just out of the blue, he goes, "Hey, I've been meaning to tell you this, but one of the reasons that we liked you was that your high school coach called us and said, may not be the best guy you ever have, may not be the fastest, may not be the strongest, but the most coachable guy I've ever had." And at the time, that meant a little bit, but it means more and more and more because I see that in business.
Right.
You have to be coachable, and you have to understand no matter what level you're at, there's going to be a part of the business you don't get. And you and I, you've experienced that with me. Digital for me has been, is still an ongoing challenge, but I'm going to get over it because I'm willing to spend the time and to do the things till it gets figured out. And when you're coachable, that always gives you the opportunity to win.
I dig that, man. I dig it, Bill. Like, you've got so many golden nuggets that you've dropped. I don't even think you realize you've dropped them. Like, this is amazing, man. As we wrap up the conversation, hearing your sports background and hearing what you did, and just like even the family ties to the sports lessons that you can share right there too. You did mention, we have to touch base on this. You mentioned being part of a pit crew in NASCAR.
Oh, yeah.
Come on now, like, dude, your former Alabama running back, you got to play, or you got to be part of the program for your freshman year, right?
Don't stretch it too far there.
Yeah, you got to be part of the program. You got to be under Coach Bryant. You got to experience that at the collegiate level. You've been coaching. You get to be around the sports, but then you had the NASCAR. Okay, pit crew NASCAR.
Not IndyCar.
IndyCar. Sorry, IndyCar. Yeah, big difference. Okay, IndyCar, pit crew. Talk to us about how that actually happened.
So I grew up around racing. My uncle was there's a guy named Bobby Allison who was a Winston Cup champion, and my uncle Tommy Green was actually Bobby's first sponsor in NASCAR. And for a while, my uncle owned part of the racetrack in Birmingham at the Birmingham Fairgrounds, Birmingham International Raceway, where Donnie Allison, Bobby Allison, Red Farmer, Neil Bonnet, Davey Allison, Clifford Allison, a lot of these guys that became NASCAR legends really got their start. There was a thing that used to be around called the Hueytown Gang or the Alabama Gang. And so my family knew all those. My mom babysat Davey Allison one time. And so we just had always been around NASCAR. So I grew up loving racing. But my dad always, when it came to May, we would get on the radio and then later television. But I can always remember my dad, we had watched the Indy 500 together. So fast forward years later, for 14 years, I spent at the ballpark in Arlington. My office was there where the Texas Rangers play. I had an office that overlooked center field. And I met a guy that was officing there who a guy named John Lopes. And John was a West Point grad, was a helicopter pilot in the invasion of Grenada, just an amazing guy. He and I became fast friends. Well, some years later, out of the blue, and I still don't know how this happened, but a businessman from Phoenix, Arizona, reached out to him from Chandler and reached out and said, I want to start an IndyCar team, and I want you to manage the team. Now, John was an attorney, and he was connected to sports. He was the number 2 guy on the Mavericks with the Dallas Mavericks. They had a firm, I believe, called Johnson Johnson at the time, and it may have been Johnson and Swanson, but John was the number 2 attorney for the Mavericks and had done some NASCAR contracts, and he and I would go to races together and be walking around in the pit area at NASCAR, which is really cool, in the garage area, that kind of stuff. Well, this guy reaches out to him. Steve Fisher calls him and says, hey, I'm starting this team, and I want to talk to you about managing it. And so John and I are at lunch. He obviously accepted, and he's telling me this, and I'm like, dude, you got to find something for me to do. I don't care. I don't care what it is. You need me carrying water, gas, tire. I don't care. I sweep the garage. I got to be a part of this. So couldn't figure anything out. They go have the first race in Homestead, which is down in Orlando, and our car got about 8 to 9 seconds, 10 seconds of airtime. And it was toward the end of the race when we wrecked. So the only airtime we get is the wrecker. In IndyCar, they put a diaper under these cars and they pick them up. And so the wrecker toting our car off is our big airtime. So the sponsors were not real happy with that. So they get back. A couple of days go by. John calls me and he says, I got something that you may be able to do. And I'm like, yeah. And he says, can you do PR? And I'm like, oh, Johnny. I was born doing PR. I came out of the room doing PR, brother. And he said, you think you can handle it? I'm like, yeah, I can handle it. Had I ever done PR professionally? No. I was like, you bet I can handle it. So, and Bob Jenkins, who was the guy, was the announcer for IndyCar that year. We had a big meeting at the end of the year, and I got PR Person of the Year, which was really cool. He gave me that. But anyway, he says, all right, well, let me see. And I said, hey, wait a minute. I don't think you can afford me. In fact, I'm almost confident that you can't possibly afford me. And his voice just dropped. He's like, oh, so why are we even having this conversation then? I said, well, I didn't say you couldn't have me. I said you couldn't afford me. You find a way to get me on the crew, and I'll work at what you need me to work for. And he said, what can you do? And I said, well, that's your problem, not mine. Because outside of PR, you don't want me around riches, that's for sure. So he said, well, let me talk to the owners and see. He comes back a couple of days later, and he said, we got it figured out. Every team has a sign guy, a guy that tells the car where to stop in the pits. He holds a sign out. You can do that. And I'm like, I'm in. Let's go. And so my freshman year in '99, that was what I did. I ended up very quickly pulling the hoses for the air guns for the left front tire changer and being the guy responsible for taking care of the replacement nose if anything happened, which did happen at one race. And then my next year I was on the fuel team. I controlled the amount of fuel that went into the car. I wasn't over the wall. The fuel team's a 2-man. You got a guy at the tank controlling an IndyCar. It's all gravity. And so we had this giant tank and controlling how much fuel goes into the car. And that's what I did my second year. But it was absolutely some of the most fun I had. And real estate put an end to that. Robert Allen, my agent, called me. We were about to start. We're in February of 2001. And my agent called me and said, hey, I got something you need to look at, and it's going to mean that you won't be able to be in racing this year. And I'm like, ooh, wow, it better be big. And he goes, well, it is. And that started my relationship with Robert Allen. And it broke my heart to have to leave racing, and I miss it to this day. But it was so cool to, as an adult, to be a part of a team, to be a part of a professional team to be, I remember 99. Now, we had a full season, but the races that really stand out, the Indy 500. So 99, standing out, IndyCar has 11 rows, 3 deep, and they don't do it quite the same as NASCAR. They actually line up on the track, and they're sitting there, and all of the crew stands behind the car while the national anthem is played and the flyover's done. And that first year, standing there and looking around, and there being well over 300,000 people there. And we had the B-1 bomber fly over. It just still one of my favorite memories in life.
Oh man, you've had some cool experiences, Bill. Like seriously.
I've been incredibly blessed. I'll guarantee you that. Ain't over yet, brother. Ain't
Oh
over
yeah,
yet.
you're just getting started, man. You're doing a lot of cool things. So as we wrap this up, guys, if you haven't figured it out by now, athletes are not dumb jocks. I hate that. That's why I say it, Bill. Like I started this show to show people, like, yeah, these sports figures, people who are into sports and who enjoy sports, yeah, they're not dumb jocks. If you guys have heard Bill today, I hope that completely wipes out any of those preconceived ideas that you might have had about athletes and whatnot, because he's definitely successful. He's taken advantage of opportunities that have come his way, and he's persistent. The last question, Bill, if there's one thing that sports have taught you in your life that you would pass on and just share with the audience, what would it be? What's the most important lesson that sports have taught you in your life?
The more than 9 to 5. So one of the things that I learned in high school in sports is you show up at practice, you're like everybody else. Now there's going to be all different levels of skill, and you've got to make sure that you're willing to put in the extra time. For me at Bama, one of the things that happened during season, and my roommate used to he would go, "You're insane, dude," because after practice, we'd get back, have dinner, I'd get all my studies done, and at 9 o'clock, I'd go run. And I'd go on wind sprints. And I had to do that to be at the best possible level that I could be at. I had to be putting in more time. I had to be putting in more study. And that's the thing that carries on in life. If you're just going to give the minimum required time, then be happy with whatever result it is that you get. And that'll be all different levels, because there's going to be some people that are always have some natural ability at whatever you're doing, and they're going to be ahead of you. But if you want to excel, you can. And all it takes is the time and the dedication to say, I'm going to put the time in, study. I'm going to put the time in if you're an athlete and working out. Michael Jordan, that's one of the great examples of that. The guy that's up at 5 o'clock and shooting till midnight or whatever. You've got to be able to do that and understand what I love about my 15-year-old. So we just finished football, and he would go, he does this every day. He's been doing this for about a year. And I'm like, dude, if you keep this up, you're going to be amazing. So he's right at 6 foot. He's 151 pounds, but for over a year, he's been working out 2 hours a day on every day except game day. So he'll have practice, come home, we go to LA Fitness, and he puts in 2 full hours. And his body is just absolutely amazing looking. But he understood and understands it's that time that makes the difference. That's what separates you from every other guy on the team. And do whatever it takes to be more valuable to your team. In baseball, I got him into pitching, so he's a first baseman, center fielder, pitcher. And it was because, look, everybody's going to have a first baseman. You don't have to be the best incredible athlete on a baseball team to be the first baseman, because you may have the least amount of movement in the field. But you got to be good. And so we started doing pitching. Well, we found out that, holy cow, the guy's really good pitching. And so we done the same thing. He's taking lessons year in, year out. And last year, one of the things I'm so proud of him about, they're in their so he's a freshman in high school. So they're in their middle school baseball season, and they lost a couple of games because they just didn't have anybody in center field. And you can't play baseball if you're not strong up the middle. And my kid goes to the coach in the middle of the game and says, put this guy in at first. I'm going to go play center field.
Oh.
And so the next inning, he's jotting out to center field. And I'm like, holy cow, what's going on here? Well, he finished the year out moving from the starter at first base to the starter at center field, changed their year because now the outfield became a highlight, and they got strong up the middle, which you have to be. So you have to figure out, what is it that I have to do in my business to be more valuable to the business than the next guy? And if I'm putting in the extra time, I'm going to see those opportunities where I can be of more value. If I'm of more value, I'm not the guy that gets cut, transferred, laid off, fired, whatever. I'm the guy that people up the ladder look to and go, can't do without that guy. Let's make sure, you get raises, you get promotions, that kind of thing. But put that extra time in, it always pays back. My dad taught me, when you're the best that you can be, you don't have to worry about your boss giving you a promotion, because if your boss doesn't, somebody else will.
I dig that. Bill, this has been amazing, man. I seriously have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you, man. And for all the listeners out there, I really hope you enjoyed it as well. I hope you enjoyed this interview. I hope you share this with friends and family and athletes and coaches and other business owners, entrepreneurs, anybody who's in this sphere. As you can see, Bill's got it all. Like it's kind of a well-rounded circle here. And heck, dude, he's written books. He's got a successful real estate business. He knows what he's doing, and he's got a lot of sports ties, a lot of lessons sports can teach you. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. Bill, thank you so much for joining the show.
My pleasure.
It was an absolute blast. And again, for anyone out there who hasn't left me a review yet, please subscribe to the podcast, leave me a review on Apple Podcasts, and we'll be coming to you next week with another interview.